Today I'm speaking with author, raconteur, and teacher Raina Wylde. Raina is the founder of the Creators Collective and host of the Creators Podcast. Today we're going to talk about Bob Marley and creation from the place of separation. How do we create one love when we're feeling separate ourselves? This feels like such a universal question. It's a question I ask myself anytime I'm feeling separate. How can I connect? How can I connect? How can I alchemize this? How can I get to from this experience of loneliness, separation, outsiderness, to that oneness experience I can have listening to music or on the dance floor or having sex? How do we bridge these gaps? Surely this is where true art lies. I can't wait to hear more. Welcome, Raina.
Hello.
Hello,
It's
hello.
nice to be here.
I'm so happy to meet you in person, kind of
I know.
person-ish, in person-ish.
Yeah, it's awesome. Are you across the pond?
So I'm in LA. Where are you?
I'm in South Carolina right now.
Okay, okay, beautiful. So it's funny because you were my buddy when I recently went to Carmel to this conference, and in the evenings I was staying in an RV,
hmm
and it was sort of my treat was to get back to your class on Bob Marley. So the conference was fine, but this was like my jam, and I just dropped my daughter off, my eldest daughter off at university. And so and I know you've had a similar thing, and I was feeling gutted.
Oh,
It was, oh my God. I mean, it's great. She's doing great, but I felt like a gutted animal. And returning to your conversation about Bob Marley and his spirit was so
mhm.
helpful to me.
Oh my gosh, that makes me so happy. Yeah, also as a parent, I've just recently dropped off my second oldest child in the same process, so I know that well. And God, talk about the learning curve that's there.
Jesus, Mazel Tov, you're full empty nest now.
I know it's a PhD in human development right there.
It really is, isn't it? It
Yeah.
really is. Um, so yeah, I mean, I guess that's it. That's where I find myself now, and in different ways of sort of like in new experiences of loss and separation. And
Mm.
just when you thought you've got a set of things down, then life will come in with another loss or separation, and then okay, back to the drawing board. Now we evolve from here.
Mm.
And I think that was what was really interesting to me about the Bob Marley conversation was, we always think about how incredibly, almost ridiculously positive his music is. And you were bringing in this idea of, well, poverty, separation, difficulty. And to think of that music rising out of that was just, I don't know, it's extraordinary. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I should just say, I'm not a Bob Marley expert. I actually, when I shared that I was going to be doing this class, as I teach so many different classes at the intersection of philosophy and lived life, one person chimed on and said, "Oh my God, I'm so glad someone's teaching a class. I've spent 45 years as a devotee and have nearly every book that's ever been written on him and have gone to," I mean, they listed out this whole pedigree. And I said, "My God, you should have taught the class." And I think so much of what I'm trying to do, all of it is anchored, I think, in this conviction that art and creativity is not decoration, it's survival. We create our way through despair. Um, and that creation, the act of creating, is not on this side of the depression, the anxiety, the loss. It's not that we get to a creative state when we're well regulated and our nervous systems are all put together, but rather that we create through that process. That the creativity is actually a kind of alchemizing effect that lifts us. And so much of what I do is I help people slow down and risk honesty and make something really alive in a world that worships, I think, speed and perfection and polishing things and trying to get it just so. And I think Bob Marley really, he jumped out at me as a creator who taught these things, creativity as a spiritual path, not comfort, right? But devotion. And if you look at the long arc of his very short life, you see that over and over, that the wounds that he carried were really the soil that grew so much of it. The outsiderness and loneliness and loss grew his voice. And that within that, I think his playfulness was a rebellion. You kind of talked about the positivity of his music. There was a reason for that, right? It wasn't denial of the suffering that he was in. It really was a defiance. And I think that's one of the reasons why he was so inspiring to me. I started that class actually with kind of that very shocking moment, right? That rehearsal at Hope Road when gunmen kind of break in, and then later that concert where there's 80,000 people.
Tell us this story, because the people listening won't know. So tell us a little bit about the background of his sense of separation and that moment.
Yeah, Bob Marley was born as a biracial son. I think that was one of the things that was interesting to me about him. One of the quotes that jumped out was his later wife, Rita, talking about how he was not the idealized husband, that he was not this person who she was looking for. He was too white, he was too short. And Bob held this outsider status from the day he was born, right? He's raised in 9 Mile, and which is a very rural area. And in part, he was one of many progeny by an Englishman who seems to have taken advantage of a number of young Jamaican women. And Bob was raised in kind of this bastardized position in which he was often handed down chores from his elder brothers and cousins, and was made to do really, really hard work. And all the biographies I read or the documentaries I watched kind of attested to the same thing, that this really, really impacted him, that outsider ideal left him longing to be an insider, but also so conscious of both sides. And you hear this later on in his music, of course. I think that's one of the reasons why it appeals to so many people from across the board. Anyone who has kind of an outsider badge finds themselves roped in by his music, and that's really what he's doing. He's pushing up against his own despair. He later comes to Trenchtown, which, if you can kind of think of that urban ghetto, he's brought there from this rural environment, which must have felt idyllic in comparison to Trenchtown. And one of the things that's really interesting about that is he quickly discovers that music will be his way out. And he latches on to a few really good mates who will later become the Wailers. And together they kind of invent this idea of using music as their way up, their way out. And I love this about Bob. He was not...
The way up or the way out or the way through.
Well, and I think yes, of course, and I think it's all of it at once. I mean, when I think of the way out for him, it was so socioeconomic. It was the way out for him, right? I don't think he envisioned, first of all, that it would ever take him to the top, but neither do I think that he was just making music to try to somehow or another pass the time. Like, he really saw this as something that he could utilize, and he knew he had a gift. And I think that's one of the things that's so beautiful. An early mentor of his, Joe Higgs, really taught him that practice was devotion, right? And so the accounts talk about Bob, even as a young man, spending hours and hours and hours perfecting whatever instrument he could get near him. I think this is really convicting, right? For any creator, for any artist, for anyone, right? How much do we look at the things that we utilize as tools in our lives, like creativity? How much do we look at it through the lens of a spiritual practice or a spiritual devotion? But it really was for him, and that practice paid off.
It sure did. Big time, big time. Yeah, I mean, it seems that you and I have found each other for a reason. I do feel that we're on the same wavelength in terms of understanding that creativity is healing. Mm-hmm. There is, at least I am technically in the healing world. But creativity is my obsession, and creativity is my obsession. And one of the things I've noticed is it hasn't gotten fully woven into the understanding of mental health and healing. It's like mental health still is trained towards the pathologizing and some sense of linearity, like once we've gotten our shit together or whatever, then we can do the next thing. And then there's, on the other side of the fence, there's this, the cliches and perhaps truths also about artists, which is they suffer and they're in pain. But somehow those things haven't gotten woven together in our understanding of mental health.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think if so much of our anesthetizing culture had its way, we would have no Van Gogh, we would have no Shakespeare, we would have so little of the brilliant creativity that comes to us. We would certainly not have Romeo and Juliet. They would have been advised away from their disastrous love story. And I think that one of the interesting things
Yeah,
is that
I kind of just caught up with that. That was funny. Don't do this. It's going to be too painful.
I apologize.
No,
No,
no.
I think it is so interesting though, because if you look at our modern concept of what it means to be alive, we really want to be alive without any of the risks of being alive. We are sold near constantly this concept that the highest state of being is to be safe. You hear it everywhere. I mean, really, you hear it in the airports. Our chief priority is making you safe. We see it on the highways. Stay safe. We hear it from parents. Hey, be careful. Everything in our culture emphasizes this idea of safety. Now, I'm a keen student of history. I'm a bit of an anthropologist, and some of my undergraduate studies were in that as well. And one of the things that always strikes me is that safety is code for control by empires. We certainly live in one of the most controlled and controlling times that has ever existed. And safety is how they hook us. I think of the great time period of the Roman Empire in which it held so many enslaved nations. And what was its great statement? Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. That's what it would bring. If you were a holdout rebel city, it would bring war to your doorsteps and say, we're bringing the peace of Rome. It will cost you your subjugation. It will cost you your happiness. But don't worry about it. We're making you safe in the long run. And that is really what's happening. We have bought into the myth of safety, that safety is somehow attached to happiness. It is not. Actually, we find that people who are greater risk takers, people who are more willing to experiment, trial and error, even to the point of loss, are far happier than people who play it safe. So if you think about that, I would actually say that creative people probably do suffer more because they're actually willing to take a risk. People who are actually profoundly uncreative are often, they're fine hiding behind the white picket fence, living a settler existence, right? Pioneers are willing to get out into the muck. They're willing to get out into the mess. And because of that, there is going to be more risk. There is going to be more loss. I don't think there has to be a sharp oppositional role between healing arts and, say, the arts. I think that they are aligned to the degree to which we understand that to be healed is to be whole, and to be whole is to live a human experience. There is nothing that takes away the risk of being alive, right? And we've been
Yeah,
sold that
yeah. Let's
myth.
let's pause with that for a second. As someone who's hankered for safety my whole life, I'm going to sit with that statement. There is nothing that takes away the risk of being alive. Yeah,
Yeah.
that feels like truth. But what is this? What is this safety? We have a word for it. Is it only control? I hear what you're saying. Kind of historically and in terms of patriarchy, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. What about as an emotional state, do you think we've been coded that way too?
I think the myth of safety is so seductive, right? We have certainly been coded for it. And ultimately, what I think it becomes is an idea of stay small, don't risk yourself, you'll be okay. And if you look around, people are clinging to safety. They still lose the job. They still get the diagnosis. They still wake up one day, regretting that they didn't take the chance. It's gnawing at them. It becomes a deep sense of embitteredness while they're living their quiet, comfortably numb lives. You can live an entire life of protecting yourself and still lose. Loss is still going to come. This is one of the things that fascinates me about wellness culture. Of course, I've been a part of it for so much of my life as well. I've given a great deal of my life and a great deal of my own fortune to it. And I think that one of the most interesting things about it is that it says it'll all work out. If you do enough yoga, it'll work out. If you take enough classes, if you get enough certifications, if you drink the right kind of juice, if you, God, the extreme list of the things, right? It will work out for you. And I hate to break it to people, it's not going to work out for you. You are going to die.
Yeah.
Right? And whether it's 70 years, 45 years, or 115 years, it's going to happen. And it will never have been enough to live life fully and deeply. To quote Henry Miller, the single purpose of being alive is to live fully, right? That's what we have to take on. And in order to take that on, we actually have to accept that we're all playing a losing hand. And this is why creativity is so important, because it teaches us to play that losing hand well.
Oh, this is such an interesting perspective, particularly from oh gosh, I wish I could remember. I had this conversation with one of my besties the other day, and I said something like, it was something like we're all playing a losing hand. We're all going to hell in a handbasket. And she said, well, yes, but Jane, remember that words have power and you're also a creator, right? With your words. So I said, okay, fine, then, we're all just walking each other home. I went into like a high vibration. So truth, I'm innately rather like you. I like to talk about death. I do feel like we're in this for only a minute. I do want to make the most of it. And I feel like that's the message I want to share with other people as well. Like, yay, let's fucking party. Here we are, And yeah, what do you think about what I just said in terms of we're all playing a losing hand? I mean, I kind of like it. I think it's an embrace, but I also see if we say I'm playing a losing hand, that could be seen as inviting in some kind of victimization.
Yeah, well, and I certainly don't want us to feel victimized by life, but rather empowered by life. I think of Jean-Paul Sartre, who probably has one of what I would describe as the most bleak outlooks in the philosophical world, who also said he never lived one day of his life with despair. And I believe him. I think Camus really gives us such a great example of this to draw from. The French existentialists. He talks about this concept of the absurd, which is you wake up one morning and you realize that you're so desperate for meaning. You want there to be meaning. You want there to be a big story. You want there to be some grand overarching narrative. And what happens? You look up at the sky, there's stars there. There's 3-1 Atlas streaming towards the sun. If you don't know what that is, you can go and Google it, and it might be here by now. But, you see these strange intercelestial objects coming towards us. You're looking at the sky, and what is it? It's greatly indifferent to you and your desire for meaning. And so what do? You yell at it and you tell it your theory of everything, and you really lecture the sky because you want it. And the sky doesn't answer back. The universe is mute. The heavens turn to brass. And Camus' whole point is this clash between our hunger for meaning and the world's blank stares, what he called the absurd. And how do we live in the absurd? Well, the answer is not to deny it. It's not to pretend that there's a tidy meaning, or, oh, well, it's just going to be all happy and roses eventually if you just work hard enough, right? His answer is, and I love this word, and I'll tie it back to Bob, his answer, Camus' answer, is to revolt. It's to live anyway. It's to create anyway. It's to love anyway, because the point is not to escape the absurd, it's to lean into it. And that's what I see with people like Bob Marley. That's why I think he gives me such great hope, because in the face of this trench town, right, this tenement shack, these just degraded living conditions, he writes "No woman, no cry," right? And he zooms in the lens onto this moment, there where he's at. And I love that. I love that instead of making despair, he made art. In fact, after the attempt on the assassination attempt on him before one of his concerts, he 2 days later goes on to perform, right? And he actually got hit, right? I mean, he suffered an immense wound. And he still gets up. He's still playing guitar 2 days later. I would be out, and I actually said this in the class that you were a part of, that it's like, if you think of all the creative excuses we have to bail on things, right? I'm like, oh gosh, and I do this. I'm like, oh, my throat's just not there today. But Bob shows up, wound and all. He's bandaged. He's, playing with kind of one arm. But there's a consecration to it. When he's later asked why did he do it, he said, the people trying to make the world worse aren't taking a day off. How can I? Well, Bob knows he's not going to solve the world's problems, but what's he doing? He's revolting against despair. He's showing up in the face of it. And I think that's the teaching point for me. Real art steps in even when it costs you. Yeah.
And maybe almost as a direct response, I'm thinking about the paradoxes sort of woven into the whole thing, of your beautiful sky description in the face of meaninglessness, we create meaning anyway. In the face of despair, we create hope. And I think that's really probably the one thing we can do. I mean, we can't do much,
Yeah. Well, that's right. Today there's so many things going on, right? We live in a world that is horrifyingly fast in its movements and seems like it speeds up over and over and over. So what do you do with that? And I think recently I've watched my children who are starting a new school. They're starting new schools. They're going through these transitions after a cross-country move. And, I think, how are they showing up? Well, they're showing up with an immense amount of courage, right? It takes courage to get off the couch. It takes courage to step into a life, right? And I think that doesn't change whether you're Bob Marley or whether you're my 12-year-old son or whether you're you or me, that you don't wait until you feel ready to live.
Well, yeah.
You leap.
We leap, exactly. I think about this quite a lot because when you're younger, you're provided with more kind of goalposts around leaping, scoring, and running and jumping. And as you get older, suddenly in midlife, well, it all gets a bit of mushy. When I think about the risks that I took when I was, I just came to America, on a one-way flight and gave myself 3 days to find a job and set up a life. And I did it, because I had to. I was just jumping. And now, like, gosh, to jump from my life now, that's a different thing. So as you build, I think it's very easy to get more stagnant. It's very easy to take less risk.
Yeah.
Right? And we don't necessarily have those prompts. So what about that? How do we prompt ourselves? Do we prompt ourselves? Do we try? What do you think?
Yeah. And I mean, I also think some of this has to do with conditioning. Certainly children may have more neuroplasticity than we do the further into middle and late stage adulthood. But I would also suggest that how children are conditioned greatly changes that. For instance, I was constantly moving. God, I moved every 3 years of my life to a new state, every year of my life to a new home. I transitioned high schools every year, 4 different high schools. I was constantly on the move. And what it created was someone who adapts to change very, very well, right? Change for me is much easier. I was talking to a dear friend of mine who I've lived near him for many, many years. And he's really stuck in his life right now. He's really stuck. His back's up against the wall. I said, why not move? And, he said, I can't do that. You and I didn't. And then he said this very interesting. He said, you and I didn't have the same childhood, did we? And obviously I had known him as a child and he knew. And I think it's interesting. Well, we didn't. He stayed in the same small town his whole life. He never left the country, never left the state, right? I have an English bulldog, and English bulldogs are great little big guardian dogs. He's like an 80-pound bowling ball. But one thing that was interesting when we first got him, the breeder told us, said, you must introduce him to new things early on. Otherwise, he will sit on the same corner of the couch and bark at his own farts. And I hate to be so crass about it, but my God, she wasn't wrong. And we actually failed it. We got him during COVID and he didn't get out a lot. And he is a total grouse. He stays on his couch barking at the wind. And this is him now. I don't think that we have to be doom and gloom about people who haven't been enculturated to very different settings when they're adults. But what I want to say is there is a culture of being a settler. I referenced that earlier. There is a culture of being a settler. And overwhelmingly, that is what we see today. Settlers prioritize safety at all costs. Settlers prioritize certainty above all. Settlers try to make sure that there's a plan in place for everything, and they cannot handle it when things deviate. They certainly can't handle it when you deviate from plan, which is why settlers are always trying to create stockades for pioneers to live within. Pioneers are people who actually say, actually, I think there's a life on the other side of those mountains. There's an ocean on the other side, and I want to see it, even if it costs me, even if it's cloudy and rainy and cold to get there. I'm willing to take that risk. That's threatening to settler culture.
Yeah. And even if there's no there there, I've undone a lot of safe things in my life in order to stay in the spirit that is authentic to me. And that's my path. And it is a completely different way to live,
Yeah.
and it doesn't stop the difficulty, at least for me personally, of wanting the meaning, wanting the story, wanting to know what I'm building, and then there's another set of facts around remembering, which is like, oh, this is a soul journey. It's not how you've been programmed. It's
Yeah.
not what you think by definition. It's not.
That's so true. And I think that life offers you opportunities for there to be cracks in the ice. I think the culture wants you numb, candidly. I think that's the dirty secret. Like, numb people buy more shit, right? Numb people don't revolt. Numb people don't make inconvenient art that rattles cages. So we get fast food, we scroll endlessly, we have fast sex, we have fast spirituality, we bypass. When you're numb, you're not really living, right? This is the ice that forms over a living, moving body of water, this great numbness. And I think refusing to be numb is the only cure, but how do we get there? And I think wonderfully, so often life delivers these cracks. Right? I remember when my father died 2 years ago, it was like the floor dropped out from under me. There was nothing to do but to let those icy waters take me under. I think that people, if they're really honest, have so many of those moments, right? The job gets yanked out from under them. The relationship, they get a phone call where they hear, hey, we've got to talk. There's a death. You lose a reputation, whatever that thing is, there's a tremendous loss. And then what? Suddenly you're there in these very living, but very disturbing, turbulent waters that you haven't been accustomed to. And then what? Well, I think for most of us, we desperately want to go back to being numb, right? Put the ice back together. And so we go to all of these different institutions who are so very good at helping us kind of piece them back. We say to the priest, we say to the politician, we say to perhaps the therapist, whoever the person is we think will give us back our life. Hey, I want my job back. I want my wife back. I want my reputation back. I think to truly work with someone at a deep level, to truly mentor them into that long dark, is really to peel back the ice even more, to ask the questions that matter and allow those cold waters to envelop them even more. Who are you without the job? Who were you before the world told you who to be?
Absolutely. It reminds me of a thing a mentor would say to me, which is every defeat for the ego is a victory for the soul.
Mm, beautiful.
And is that how you see it? Do you see this as soul work or heart work, or how do you see it?
Yeah, I really do. I see that the soul and creativity are so aligned. The soul is so malleable, right? The soul is actually so deeply ever alive. Its constant condition is to respond to life as it is.
I'm
If we
curious
take that,
to say malleable. I don't think of the soul like that. I think of the soul as something more eternal. So explain what you mean by that.
yeah, I mean, I think that if we take that metaphor of the ice
Yeah.
and we imagine if you've ever seen a riverbank where it's all icy and trapped, how is that water interacting with the riverbanks? Well, not very well, quite frankly. It's very secure, it's very steady. Actually, that's how we kind of interact with the water. We get to step foot on it because it's icy. Um, the most icy layer of our being, I would call the persona. And that's this thing that is frozen, stuck in place. It's the pieces of us that have been crystallized and formed across the years in response to our environment. But it's not actually very responsive to our environment at all. I mean, I sometimes like to imagine that, it's like the vastness of human possibility can be dwindled down to three responses, maybe four: fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn. It's like, it's so almost humorous how stuck in place we actually are. The soul, I think, is something different. The soul is those fresh moving waters underneath. And so if the ice is chipped away, if the ice is dissolved back into that flow of water, it's able to meet the different terrains, the different circumstances, the different experiences on its own terms. I think one of the greatest virtues of the soul is to meet life on its own terms, right? And so I think that's maybe what I mean when I say malleable.
Beautiful. Great. I love it. I love this idea of meeting life on its own terms. It's very
Mhm.
liberating. And it feels to me that that is what your work is about. And I do feel the archetypes of the rebel. Well, I had some others in store, but really it feels like the rebel is very much alive in you.
I think that's one of them.
Yeah.
Uh, there
And
might be others.
and
Oh, I recently heard the poet lover. I get those thrown around as
no big
well.
deal.
A little bit of this, a little bit of that. I do think that in times of oppression, and I'm not necessarily talking about physical, although I think we could, but in times of oppression, the poet takes up the sword, right? And so the poet warrior motif actually becomes tremendously important, right? It's like the most interesting man in the world who looks at the camera and says, I'm a lover, not a fighter. And then he looks back and says, but I'm a fighter too, And I think that that really is so much of this that we have been sold, I think culturally, kind of a bill of goods. I think of Bob Marley, actually. I think this is a good breakaway. Bob, at such a deep level, was talking about beautiful things, right? He's talking about joy and happiness and love. And yet, it was so fundamentally threatening to those around him, right? It was such a revolution. And I think Bob was revolutionary. Bob was identified with rebel music,
Mm,
but not because he was what I would call, a rebel. I think it was because he was a great lover.
I'm so glad we got to this, and I'll try to wrap up a conversation I would love to have for eons, but it's been dawning on me recently that love is a threat to
Mm,
the mainstream. And I won't get into the story, but something happened to me recently where I got to see that it really was a threat. I was sort of a false position. I was like, how could people be bothered by
people talking about peace and love. So I was always a bit like, I'm an innocent. I'm not powerful. I'm just like this cute peace and love person. And time is starting to show me something else. And I'm like, oh, this is a real thing. Because if you haven't had a taste of that in your bones through your parents or through your mentorship or through your heritage or through the land that you're on, if you haven't tasted it, if you haven't tasted real love and then you see it, it feels awful. It feels horrible. It feels mean. It feels like the thing you can never have. And I think this is the gap that needs to be bridged in our world. Everyone must feel more love. But you know, I get back into that position again. But it's understanding that there are these very, very different positions. And they are very much to do with inculcation. It's what we've been saturated in.
Yeah, again, going back to my rather simple dog analogy, it's like if you take a really wonderful, beautiful, docile golden retriever and you beat it every day, you will turn it into a vicious junkyard dog. Humans aren't very different, right? If you constantly suppress, depress, repress humanity, you will end up with a caged animal who, when you try to feed it a morsel of goodness, it will snap at your hand. And I think that is so much of what we're seeing today is a world gone mad, right? And part of our job is actually to offer it the good gifts of love and joy and connection and creativity in a world that I think is hell-bent on speed and has been trained to skim only the surfaces of being alive and then to move on. And that's why I think things like creativity, things like the devotion to your art is such a rebellion, right? It's the blood and it's the bone. And I think that for me, this is one of the reasons why I tend to believe that love and art are so tied together. Every artist is a lover, right? And not necessarily just a lover of the people or the physical bodies, but a lover of the world, right? They're people who are giving their gift to the world. And I think this is why we need more than ever creators who will do the thing that scares them, who will sing the note that cracks, who will write the line that is, just beyond the edge of their awareness. They have to. And it's not so that they can somehow beat the algorithm or become the next best top seller. It's because love demands to be spoken into this world, which is so starved for it.
Well said. And I want to add to that there are lots of different ways to do it.
That's right.
It can be through writing, it can be through speaking, it can be through relationship, it can be through devotion itself. I think that we can all empower ourselves to be better lovers one way or another.
Yeah, I often use the word creativity because to me that's so much of what I talk about or think about with soul work. But then people get lost, they think, oh my God, he's talking about, kumbaya and crayons. And that's not really what I'm talking about at all. To be creative is to approach life with authenticity, the willing to see life as it is, to take a risk, to experiment, and to live life with a kind of imaginative view, seeing what's possible or the proliferation of possibilities. And when you put together that unique synthesis of authenticity and imagination and creativity, well, you can be a very creative used car salesman. And you can be a very uncreative painter by the same virtue if you don't live life with authenticity and imagination and the willingness to take a risk. So our job as humans is to live a creative life. The degree to which we are not living a creative life is the degree to which we feel stuck, inhibited, and I think the greatest calling then is to be lovers of this world and creators of life.
Amen, if I may say so.
Yeah.
And I just have one more question, which is, do dogs actually bark at their own farts?
Okay. Heidegger the bulldog does, and it is one of the most disturbing things.
Because my dog has been doing a lot of like talking to what I have been saying to my daughter is maybe an ancestor or a ghost, and she thinks I'm going way too deep on it. So maybe it's the farts.
Oh my God. I felt so crass saying it, but I've been observing it this last week at home with him, and I'm just so incensed by it. Also, we have this beautiful English golden retriever, and he's much younger. Our bulldog is a seasoned, mature 4 years old, and our golden retriever is only 9 months old. And they get going. You know, the bulldog will he'll get angry that he has passed gas and he will start barking ferociously. And then the golden retriever will jump in and start barking at the walls. They're a gang of hooligans. It's maddening when you're trying to podcast.
I can just imagine. They sound wonderful, and you're wonderful. Thank you so much. I've really, really cherished this convo.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you listening.
Absolutely.